Okay, the whole reason that we're here is because of this basic claim.
Mr. Trump is a con man. He asked me to pay off an adult film star with whom he had an affair and to lie about it to his wife, which I did. Mr. Trump directed me to use my own personal funds from a home equity line of credit to avoid any money being traced back to him that could negatively impact his campaign.
Today, Donald Trump sits in a courtroom facing 34 counts of falsifying business records to make that happen. David Pecker, the former CEO of American Media, Inc., and former publisher of the National Enquirer, testified that he, Trump, and Cohen engaged in an illegal conspiracy to catch and kill stories in order to influence the 2016 presidential election. He told prosecutors that he told Trump and Cohen he would be the eyes and ears of the campaign and would notify Cohen when there were issues. He then testified that a day after the Access Hollywood tape was released, he got a call about Stormy Daniels wanting to tell her story. He told his colleague, "I don't want the National Enquirer to be associated with a porn star." Hope Hicks testified that the campaign was in crisis mode and Trump was looking to mitigate the damage. And since AMI didn't want to buy the story, they made sure Michael Cohen could take care of it. Stormy Daniels' lawyer testified that he was connected to Cohen via David Pecker's deputy and read the text he got about it. Connecting you both in regards to that business opportunity, spoke to the client this AM, and they're confirmed to proceed opportunity. So, for those of you keeping track, Cohen's first claim sure seems to be corroborated by 3 key witnesses. And then there was this claim.
What was the purpose of spreading the reimbursements to you over the 12 monthly installments?
That was in order to hide what the payment was. I obviously wanted the money in one shot. I would have preferred it that way. But in order to be able to put it onto the books, Alan Weisselberg made the decision that it should be paid over the 12 months so that it would look like a retainer.
And did Mr. Trump know about this reimbursement method?
Oh, he knew about everything, yes.
How was that held up? Well, pretty good, actually, pretty well, actually. The prosecutors were able to show that that very payment plan laid out in handwritten notes by former Trump Organization controller Jeff McConney and former financial officer Alan Weisselberg. McConney testified that he was told by Weisselberg that Trump was reimbursing his lawyer. A former accountant at the Trump Organization testified that Weisselberg was a person who had his hands in everything but would run financial decisions by Trump, which leads to this.
Visiting President Trump in the Oval Office for the first time, he says to me something to the effect of, "Don't worry, Michael, your January and February reimbursement checks are coming."
And yesterday, we heard from Madeleine Westerholt, Trump's personal secretary while he was president, who testified to Trump's personal involvement in signing checks from New York and his interactions with Michael Cohen. Back with me are Lisa Rubin and Andrew Weissman. So the case, that is the case, basically, for it being an illegal scheme. I want to hit you all with just really quickly before you react to that, some somewhat breaking news. I don't know why Trump's Truth Social is breaking news, but he just tweeted out, Judge Marchand refused to put a gag order on out of control, on the truly out of control people. Only the president, the presidential candidate, me, mistrial. Thoughts?
Well, one of those people is a criminal defendant. And Judge Marchand made that point when this was raised, saying, I don't have power over all of the United States. You are a defendant. That is why there is a gag order. And so that is the critical difference. Also, just to be clear, nothing about that gag order prevents Donald Trump from making any and all claims about Joseph Biden, his administration, talking about politics. He can even, and has, attacked the judge and the lead prosecutor, the DA. So this idea that it's like this, you can run for office and not engage in attacking jurors and witnesses.
Yeah.
Shocker.
Yeah. And apparently the judge has asked Michael Cohen to refrain from doing, interviews and talking. But again, he's not the one under the gag order. He already went to jail for this crime. Like, they were actually in the crime together. And that's, I think, a key point.
The other key difference, Joy, is one of these people has a track record of threatening people in ways that that really jeopardizes their safety, and the other does not, or the other two do not, because the former president is talking both about Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any situation in which a person's life has been threatened as a result of something that Michael Cohen or Stormy Daniels has said publicly.
Correct.
But I'm very aware of people who have been indicted and arrested for making threats against people, including people who are and have administered Trump-related cases. Tanya Chutkan, Letitia James, Judge Arthur Engoron. Fani Willis. There are multiple people under arrest or indictment in this country for making threats about those people as a result of the defendant's own statements here. So it's a combination of the fact that the judge has jurisdiction. He's the only one who's a criminal defendant.
Right.
But also, he has a track record here that's worth taking note of.
And by the way, if he wants to answer these people, he certainly could testify, couldn't he? He could get on the stand and refute them in person. But he ain't going to do that, is he?
This is such a Donald Trump tactic, which is he's happy to say things where there's no accountability. And that is the reason he didn't come into the Mueller investigation, as I know all too well. We're still waiting, even though he said he wanted to. Didn't testify in either of the impeachment hearings. He wanted to say it's the perfect call and everything's great. Refused to testify under oath about it. Is refusing, to try and delay every possible criminal trial.
Including this one.
Exactly. And that's because, if he wants to say, for instance, Michael Cohen is not telling the truth, or he wants to say, have his lawyer say in opening, Stormy Daniels is not telling the truth, that's not evidence. What would be evidence of that? If he hopped on the stand and testified to it. And until he does that, this isn't really disputed.
Yeah.
We have one person who said it under oath, and we don't have counter evidence.
There you go. Let's preview what the defense is going to do. This was their opening statement. This was Todd Blanche. Now, shortly after getting caught in 2018, you will learn that Michael Cohen made a decision. His decision he made was to blame President Trump, he's not president anymore, for virtually all his problems. He had been eventually disbarred as an attorney. He's a convicted felon. He's also a convicted perjurer. He's an admitted liar. For many, many years, going back before President Trump became president, even before Michael Cohen started working for the Trump Organization, you will learn that Michael Cohen was obsessed with President Trump. He's obsessed with President Trump even to this day. That doesn't sound, that's what they're going to do. They're going to say he's obsessed with Trump. Everybody's obsessed with Trump. Thoughts? Andrew's, can we go back to Andrew's face?
I'm like, obsessed with Trump is not a particularly fruitful line. Yes, it is fine to point out that he has lied, and he has lied under oath. It's not great when he's lying under oath to Congress. There is no reason that Michael Cohen had any personal advantage in doing
in any of it.
The only reason for that, which was lying about Donald Trump's businesses in Russia, was to protect him.
And every time there's like, well, Michael Cohen's a liar, I'm like, about what? Michael Cohen is a criminal. For who? Because the problem is that little question, always the answer is Donald Trump.